Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us in this episode 13, Air Reservations to Latin America and the Caribbean during and after COVID-19. We will have the great opportunity to meet Olivier Ponti, Vice President, ForwardKeys. Thank you to all of you, and of course, thank you, Olivier, to join us and have the time to share with us this interesting episode.
My pleasure, Arturo. Glad to be here.
Well, really very interesting for all of us, try to understand what is happening, and the more important, what could happen. No? We are all excited with the idea to be back on business, and also, well, in Latin America and the Caribbean, that is, well, we are seeing, we will take time. I think the best is that I know that you have a presentation that will give us a worldwide vision of what is happening, and after that, we will exchange ideas about that. Thank you once again, and well.
Well, thank you for having us on this virtual stage today. I'm Olivier Ponti, I'm VP for Insights at ForwardKeys. We're a travel analytics company, and we're specialists in air travel. So in the presentation that I am going to share with you today, let me share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen? Yes. All right. So in this presentation, we'll focus on air reservations to Latin America and the Caribbean during and after COVID-19. We'll be looking together at a lot of data, and before we directly dig into this data, I'd like to say a few words about where the information comes from. And what kind of sources we use to perform our analysis. So, as I said, we're a B2B travel analytics company, and what we do is help our customers understand the whole traveler's journey. From the moment they start searching for a flight using meta search engines like Skyscanner, to the moment that they book this flight, that a ticket is being issued. That's for the supply side, the demand side, how people are preparing their trip. And on the supply side, we carefully monitor air capacity. So basically all seats that airlines are putting on the market at a given time. Okay, so combining this information, we can build additional layers of intelligence so that we can not only understand what has just happened or what is happening, but what is going to happen based on actual current figures. So what do these figures tell us about the current situation? Before zooming in on Latin America and the Caribbean, I'd like to give you the global picture so that you can put the regional figures into a global perspective. So looking at year-to-date international arrivals by world region since the beginning of the year, we can see a 63% decrease compared to last year. So it's very heavy. There's basically two categories. The countries that have been, or the regions that have been hit the earliest by this crisis. So that's the Asia Pacific region and Europe, which are 70% down, with Europe catching up basically on the Asia Pacific. Usually it was until very recently, it was the Asia Pacific leading the way. Now Europe is registering slightly worse numbers than the Asia Pacific. So Europe and the Asia Pacific in one bucket, so to say, and then the Americas and Africa and the Middle East in a second bucket. So destinations that have been hit a bit later in the crisis in time, and which are both registering around 59-60% decrease. Now, that's the global picture. Let's have a look at Latin America and the Caribbean. As you can see here, there isn't much difference between the different parts of the region. Central America is down around 53%, the Caribbean 56% down, and South America almost 56% down. So everyone is impacted in the same order of magnitude. There is no winner in the current situation when looking at the global picture. On the right-hand side of this chart, you can see the results for specific destinations, key destinations. Same thing, all destinations are within the same range, -50, -55%, with one notable exception, which is the Dominican Republic, which is down by 62%. And this has a lot to do with lower than average performances at the very beginning of this year, so pre-crisis, pre-COVID-19 crisis. This is unfortunately a legacy of the very severe image crisis on the US market that the Dominican Republic had to face in August of last year. So all in all, very homogeneous results across the region. Now, this is the world we're in at the moment is a world which is still very much closed, and that explains the negative performances we're seeing across the globe. The current state of travel restrictions worldwide is still very red. As you can see, most countries are still either partially closed or totally closed. This is slowly changing. Since the beginning of June, we've seen a number of destinations slowly reopening, sometimes completely, sometimes just for a specific market. In the region of interest for us today, we can mention Antigua and Barbuda or St. Lucia that partially opened beginning of this month. We've got Jamaica just reopened, St. Martin is about to reopen, Puerto Rico as well. Martinique is also considering reopening by the end of June. So there is some movement, but globally there's still a lot of restrictions in place, and this is of course a major obstacle to any kind of a recovery model. I think recovery will have to start with the lifting of those travel restrictions. On the supply side, the situation is still very severe. The airline industry has taken a very, very serious hit with the current crisis. What we're looking at now is the global international seat capacity. You can see the very sharp decrease linked to COVID-19, and in fact, there's not much of a recovery taking place since we hit rock bottom at the beginning of April. So there's still a long way to go before we can really talk about global recovery of international travel. We've decided to look at the number of bookings that were made for a trip to Latin America and the Caribbean on a week-by-week basis. Okay, so what you can see here is the net bookings. So let me clarify this so that it's crystal clear for everybody. The dotted line you can see here, the -100%, is showing the moment when we switch from more bookings than cancellations to more cancellations than bookings, and by source market for Latin America and the Caribbean. The picture is unequivocal. Since early March, we have, for all key source markets to the region, more cancellations than bookings. It doesn't mean that there are no new bookings being made, but the volumes of cancellations always is higher than the volumes of new bookings. So what we're all hoping for is to see this dark red line here, which is showing the total global evolution of booking, go past the dotted line so that we can finally see an increase in number of weekly bookings. And you may ask, well, for which period are those bookings? What departed dates? We've taken all bookings for any departure in the future. Okay, so this is showing the willingness to travel from all key source markets. Now, so far, the global picture is quite depressing, I confess. This is a very, very tough crisis the sector is going through. But luckily, we are starting to see early signs of recovery, at least on a global scale. And there are also some encouraging signs for Latin America and the Caribbean. I'd like to start with the global picture once more and focus on a country which has played a key role in the current crisis. That's where the crisis started. It was the country that was hit the earliest, and in the meantime, it seems to be the country which is getting out of this crisis first, and that's China. What we can see here are the number of tickets that have been issued on a weekly basis since the beginning of the year. In blue, you have figures for 2019, so that's our benchmark, and in red, figures for 2020. We can clearly see here the drop linked to the COVID crisis, the travel industry hitting rock bottom beginning of February, and then there was a rebound in ticketing, rebound that was very much linked to the Chinese economy rebounding, migrant workers being able to go back to their place to their place of production, to offices or factories, a certain level of business coming back, and since then a slow, very progressive recovery, but a recovery nonetheless. And when we started seeing the progressive lifting of travel restrictions within China, we could see a stronger increase in the number of domestic tickets being issued, and this is very encouraging because it is showing that slowly things are getting back to some kind of normality. So it's just Chinese domestic market at this stage, but it's showing the importance of the domestic market in recovery scenarios. I think many destinations around the world are currently betting on their domestic market, thinking that this is probably going to be one of the first segments to recover, and the Chinese example tends to confirm this this hypothesis. Second hypothesis, which is often made, is that regional travel will also be a key to recovery. And this is indeed what we are seeing in a number of European destinations. Europe is also slowly emerging from the COVID-induced coma that affected the travel industry. A number of destinations have recently announced that they would reopen. And interestingly enough, we can see a clear link between the announcement that these destinations would reopen and the number of bookings to these destinations, of tickets being issued. We can see it here clearly with the examples of Spain, Greece, and Portugal. Destinations that announced weeks in advance that they would reopen, and that triggered a spike in booking. So you can see it here with Spain, announcements that the borders would reopen at the very beginning of July first, and immediately a surge in bookings. Same thing for Greece, where it's even more pronounced, and for Portugal, where it's even more pronounced. So this is showing the importance of regional travel, because those are international bookings, and there are bookings that are made by European source markets, and that shows that there is some pent-up demand. Okay, and that also shows the importance of governments, governmental communication. It is important for people to have a date in mind when it comes to reopening. Maybe you can change this date depending on the situation. Spain first communicated on 1st of July, and then they communicated on 21st of June. They changed the date. But what matters here is that by announcing the fact that they would reopen and putting a date, they hit people's imagination, and people understood, okay, now Spain is not open for business now, but it will be open for business soon, so I can book a trip. The other key learning from this analysis on European destinations is that the visits to friends and relatives segment is particularly resilient. We've seen this in the past with many crises, and this is confirmed once more. If you compare leisure bookings to VFR bookings, you can clearly see that VFR is rebounding in a much stronger way than leisure as a whole. So it's an interesting target group in any recovery strategy, I think, for any destination at the moment. Now we're getting closer from home here, looking at new weekly tickets to Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda, and Cancun. And we're comparing these three destinations to the Caribbean average. So you can see the Caribbean average in gray here, and the results for those three destinations, which are outperforming the average. Why did we choose these three? Well, because they communicated on the fact that travel restrictions would be lifted, and as you can see here, that triggered an increase. Okay, it's not the very strong rebound that you could see on the previous slide with Portugal and so forth, but it's a rebound nonetheless. It's renewing with growth. And here, what you can clearly see as well is the fact that a lot of people use the Easter weekends that they spent at home to book their future holiday to the Caribbean, and particularly to these destinations, Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda, and Cancun. Now, some destinations are even renewing with growth. I mean, real growth, not just having more bookings than cancellations, but even more bookings than during the same period the previous year. We found one example here, which is an interesting one. The US Virgin Islands, when focusing on the US as a source market, you can clearly see that this destination is outperforming the rest of the Caribbean. All destinations have clearly been affected by the crisis, but we can already see that some destinations are getting out of the crisis quicker than others. Interesting to note as well is that in spite of the current difficulties, there is still a desire to travel. There's still appetite for travel for a number of source markets across the globe. Here we're looking at flight searches performed for a trip to Latin America and the Caribbean. Flight searches performed in May. Okay, and what we're looking at here is the departure date for those flight searches. We can see a clear shift when comparing 2019 and 2020. 2019 is in blue, 2020 is in red. As you can see, there's relatively less searches for a trip before December, basically November, December, but a spike in searches for a trip to take place in December of this year. So Christmas holidays, basically, but also for Q1 of 2021. So that means probably still a very, very tough period ahead for most destinations, but light at the end of the tunnel, and starting from December. And Q1 2021, that is still challenging, because we're talking about very few booking as a whole, but still there is appetite to travel for this period. People are still searching for a trip for this period. Now, what kind of destination do those source markets have in mind for a trip in Q1 2021? Here we decided to focus on Spain, the US, and Canada, which are all important markets for the region. And you can see here a strong appetite for destinations like Mexico or Brazil, for example, that are often at the top of the list. So of course these figures will evolve with time, but it's interesting to be able to project ourselves in this period that looks far away, Q1 2021, but which is really looking like the most promising period for the travel industry in the coming in the near future. So it's important to get ready for this and get good marketing strategies in place to make the most of this appetite for travel. The outlook is still quite grim for the region. We're looking at actual bookings that have been made for Q4. All destinations are significantly behind. Jamaica is performing significantly better than the rest, but all destinations are in the red, and it's likely that these figures will remain in the red as we get closer to departure dates. Although looking at previous booking patterns, which you can see here in blue, we know that around 50% of all bookings are made in that booking window, July to October. So this is really when this season Q4 will be played. This is when things will be decided. Bookings for this period, the early bookings, were very much in line with trends last year. It's really from the from the start of the COVID crisis that those bookings went down, but we didn't reach that point when there were more cancellations than bookings. People that had made their bookings for a trip to LATAM in Q4 actually sticked to their bookings. It's a wait and see attitude. They're waiting to see how things develop, and then we'll decide if they cancel or not. So basically, what this means for destinations is that there is some kind of safety cushion, but if the COVID crisis is still perceived as not under control as we get closer to departure date, those bookings will evaporate. You know, it's like a mirage. You get closer to the departure date, you think you have a booking, and then it disappears. But if by October, people have the impression that COVID is under control, then those bookings will not evaporate. We'll have some kind of rebound, like what we've seen in the previous slides, looking at the situation in Europe, and then it will still be possible to salvage at least part of Q4 and particularly the Christmas season. So there is still some hope there. One last thing I'd like to mention is that it's great to have fresh information like the data I have just shared with you, but it's also a good idea to have a look at past information, what you already know about your markets, your key source markets, when devising your marketing strategy. We know, for example, that some markets tend to have a shorter lead time than others. By lead time, I mean the moment between the difference between the moment they book and the moment they fly. So the US, typically, they have a shorter lead time than Germany. But Spain or Canada also have a relatively short lead time. So if what you're after is a quick rebound, you really need cash quick, it actually makes sense to try to target those markets that tend to be more last minute in their decision making when it comes to booking a trip to Latin America. So try and see what you already have in store in terms of information and how you can maximize this intelligence that you have in-house to make optimal use of your marketing budget. That leads me to the last point I wanted to make. I know this is a very challenging period for many of us, but as in all crises, it's also a crisis that comes with a number of opportunities. And I think that one of the big opportunities for destinations and tourism businesses at the moment is to make the switch to being really, truly data-driven. I think it's a big asset we have at the moment compared to previous major crises we've gone through in the past decades. At the time, we didn't have the same level of information as what we have now. The global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, it's a time when we didn't have the kind of information that I've just presented you with. And that's information that helps you quickly identify opportunities in a moving landscape, let's say, and help you make the most of it, make the most of the limited financial resources that you have, so you can be more efficient in the use of your budget, so that you target the right people at the right time, and I think that's crucial. I say this not only for our data, but for data in general. There's just much more really interesting data available at the moment than at any other time in history. So let's try to make use of this to get quickly out of this unprecedented situation. I thank you all for your attention, and Arturo, I believe it is now time for question and answers. Back to you.
First of all, thank you so much. Really, very interesting your presentation. No, very and more in times that you say it's time to be data driven. No, and this is, we really appreciate it. Well, and it's a mix, not about concerns and hopes. No, it depends on which figures we take a look. No. We will try to use those information and try to understand a little bit more what could happen, because when you say, for example, there is much cancellations than new bookings, no? But staying in the region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we feel that there is a lack of information that perhaps is not contributing, because nobody knows when flights will be ready to depart once again. There are bookings that are confirmed that every week the airline companies are rescheduling, no? Or no? And nobody knows exactly when the border will be open, independent of some market that you mentioned, Jamaica, Antigua, Barbuda, so on. Most of the markets are completely closed. There is a lot of, but not well information that perhaps could contribute, that the people run to cancel, and not perhaps have the appetite to say, well, I would like to book to go to visit friends and families, no? That seems that will be the first step. But you call or you go to the internet for the booking, well, there is no seat available for this time. You call, no, yeah, we will have the first flight for July 2nd. I have some information about, for example, some companies from Spain, and they are every other day, every week rescheduling. No, you think that these uncertain times of information could help to have this huge number of cancellation and not looking more quickly recovering of new bookings, or is a problem of the attitude, appetite of the travelers?
Mm-hmm. I think there's several things in what you just said. Let's start with a global comment, maybe. In the past decades, one of the key trends was continuous improvement of our access to information. Okay, we have gotten used to getting better and better information, and to getting it faster than ever. So that's the global trend. And here we are in a situation now when the information we thought was reliable turns out to be very questionable. I'm thinking of airline schedules, as you just mentioned, and it's a world with plenty of uncertainties. You don't know when destinations will reopen. You don't know if the rules of the games will not change on the way. You know, with all of a sudden the government deciding to implement a quarantine. You don't know what rules will apply for people when they go through an airport or are on board an aircraft. You don't know if you will be insured when you reach your destination. There's plenty of things you don't know. At the moment you book your ticket, you just don't know if you will really be able to fly, if your flight will not be canceled at the last minute, and if you will be really welcome in a destination that is truly open for business. That's a lot of uncertainties. And to be honest, the airline business is a mess at the moment. It's a mess because airlines are in survival mode. They are all in a very, very tough financial situation, and they gamble. They gamble by announcing that they will open, you know, routes that they're not sure they will be able to operate. They're testing the ground, they're testing the water, putting some, you know, giving people the possibility to book a flight and therefore express their interest for a specific route. And then if they realize that that demand is not there, that they're going to lose money with this route, they decide to cancel it because they just can't afford it. And by the way, seen from the consumer's perspective, this is horrible. We're destroying consumer confidence here because people think they can organize, plan their holidays, and all of a sudden they realize that that they've built castles in the air, that they will not be able to reach their destination. And by the way, they don't know if they will get their money back, or better said, when they will get their money back. But actually, we could say if they will get their money back, because plenty of airlines are in such a shaky financial situation that people don't know if they will make it through this crisis. So maybe they will just never get their money back. So I think when it comes to rebuilding consumer confidence, there's really a lot to be done, and this is going to be key. Do people feel safe taking the plane? Do people feel safe flying to a specific destination that is said to be COVID-free? It remains to be seen how those things develop in the future. But at the moment, consumer confidence is at a historic low, I suppose, even though there is, as we've seen, still willingness to travel.
Yeah, a very interesting and important point that you say, not that the airline companies, well, we know that mainly all the planes are not flying, and it's the huge crisis that we see in the travel industry, and they are testing. But it's like the chicken and the egg, no? They are testing, but the consumers, well, that are trying to say, well, I am ready to fly once again, but perhaps book, and they are rescheduling. It's very tough, and it's sad, no?
Because yes, it is. Well, what we can learn from China once more is that when recovery is underway, it doesn't mean that all segments are recovering at the same speed. Okay, so we can clearly see that air travel is recovering slower than travel by using land transportation, for example. So when you see pictures of Chinese tourists visiting the Great Wall of China or the Forbidden City, you know, those iconic places, you should keep in mind that most of these people came by car to the destination. So it's not only domestic travel; it's almost local travel. Because people are still not that confident with using air transportation. But even though this is true, as we could see in the chart I presented earlier, there is a real catch-up in terms of a real recovery in terms of air travel. It's just recovering slower than hospitality in general. So that's one thing we can learn from. The other thing we can learn from this example is that at the moment, lead times are extremely short. Because people do not have confidence in the future, they tend to book at the very last minute. You know, okay, there's a plane, there's a flight departing soon, it's still there. I'm going to book this trip. There's a fair chance I can go. Travel restrictions are not going to change in the coming days, so I book. Current lead time for Chinese booking at the moment is 4 days. Okay, people book their trip 4 days in advance. That's extremely short. Extremely short. How do you want to plan a long-haul trip in the current context? That's very difficult. That's why long-haul intercontinental travel is likely to recover last, because it requires a level of confidence that is totally lacking at the moment. And this is where we as an industry have a responsibility. We can help rebuild this confidence, and there's a lot to be done on this respect.
Well, these are not very good news for Latin American, because long-haul flights are very important for Latin America in general. No? Perhaps not for the Caribbean if the Americans decide open the borders, and that, but mainly all Latin America depend of long-haul flights. And
exactly
about that, one issue is the problem with the international airline companies in the north, Americans and Europeans, and the other are the regional companies, that mainly all of these companies are in huge problems. How do you see what happened with Avianca or LATAM, both with Chapter 11 in US, and you know, this
is a major concern. At the moment, we know that a major restructuration is about to take place in the sector. Some companies can benefit from government bailouts, and some others don't. So it's a very skewed market we're looking at the moment. If you can, I don't know, like Lufthansa, count on government support from not only from Germany but from some other governmental entities across Europe, like Austria, for example, then you are in a much stronger situation than if you're LATAM or Avianca. If you're Singapore Airlines, you can count on very strong government support. So this is completely changing the competitive landscape in the airline industry, because we're introducing elements that break free market, basically, and this will have consequences for the airline on the airline landscape of tomorrow. You know, it's difficult to tell at this stage who will survive this crisis and who will not, because we don't know how long this crisis will last. But one thing is clear: the longer it lasts, the less companies will be left standing, and it's likely that those companies will be the ones that benefited from government bailouts, or that are extremely performant at what they're efficient at what they're doing. There's another possibility. I know at the moment it may seem as a vision of the mind, but when you look at it, it's a perfect time to start a new airline. Oil is cheap. There's plenty of aircraft on the market. So if you can come up with a good new business model, and you start with a blank sheet, well, maybe you can make some good business in the current situation. But it remains to be seen if this is only a vision of the mind, or if it will materialize at some stage, and where that will materialize.
Yeah, this is a very good point. The problem is in between, no? Because at this moment, the airline companies are trying to survive and present to Chapter 11 or whatever, having in mind the idea to negotiate or to receive support from the governments, no? And will take some time until they can recover, or they decide, well, we will need to go out and new people arrive, new investors, and rebuild the company. But this will take time, could be.
Yes, of course. And if you're an airline and you've just decided to sell part of your fleet and to lay off your crew, basically, you will not be able to recover in a matter of weeks. You'll have to hire new people, train them, make sure you have a company which is in working order. So it's the decisions that have been made in the past few weeks and that are currently being made regarding downsizing and major airlines will have long-lasting consequences. That's for sure. So that's why I don't see the scenario of a very quick rebound as plausible. I think it will take time. I think we're going to have to live with the consequences of this crisis for a while. And thinking about government bailouts, we should also keep in mind that some governments are putting a number of conditions to those bailouts. If I take the example of Europe, for example, we know that in some cases, the agreement with the airline is that some routes would have to be abandoned, especially on the domestic market, within the framework of the green transition. That train should be preferred for domestic travel rather than plane, because it's considered as more ecologically friendly. So looking at a recovery model for domestic travel in a lot of destinations, in a lot of countries, it will simply not happen. We will not go back to a previous situation because the rules of the games have changed in between. So what does this mean in terms of connectivity in places where we've got big hubs? So you need that domestic traffic because it's feeding the international network.
Yeah,
there are some major reconfiguration underway, and as it is happening, it is difficult to know exactly which shape this renewed travel sector will take in the post-COVID-19 world.
Looking to Europe, that beyond UK, seems that all the markets, all the country will be open soon, end of June, beginning of July. Do you think that the experience that we can learn something that could help for the recovery is with the experience of what will happen with this opening and borders, receiving not only regional but perhaps international? There are markets like Spain that are ready to open for international flights, and I think that Italy and France will be following Spain soon. Do you think that if this experience goes well, could help for a quickly recover? When I say a quickly, is that, well, more quickly, not that will be.
I think what this does is stress the importance of coordination. And as a European, I've been appalled in the early stages of this crisis by the lack of coordination within the European Union, when we had the supranational organization, the European Union, giving some guidelines as regards to how each national country should behave in terms of handling of travel restrictions, for example, and the fact that in the end each country decided to go its own way, and it was a complete mess, very difficult to read from a consumer's perspective. Recovery is taking a similar path, actually, although it looks like it's getting already a bit more coordinated. The dates are very similar. The regulations put in place are also quite similar. So all of a sudden, we rediscover the value of a coordinated approach. After all, there are a number of agreements in place. There is a Schengen zone. There is a foundation on which to build, and that can kickstart recovery. This is what we are seeing. So yes, there are some differences in terms of speed when it comes to recovery. A place like Portugal or France or Germany, those destinations and source markets are recovering much faster than the UK, for example, where you have still quarantine regulation in place, and where bookings are flat, both for trips to the UK and from trips from the UK. This is something we need to keep in mind when looking at those travel restrictions. It's not only about having destinations open, it's about having source markets that are able to leave the country and come back in a smooth way. So going back to the importance of coordination, it is key because, again, from a consumer perspective, if each country has very different rules, if each region within the country also has very different rules, it's very, very challenging to plan a trip, and especially a trip that would involve multiple destinations. Very, very tricky. So in an area like LATAM and the Caribbean, it's even more difficult to get that coordination in place because there is no supranational entity like the European Union. So it's got to be a lot of bilateral agreements, a lot of negotiation. This is also what we're seeing in the Asia Pacific, for example, where we have a number of travel bubbles being put in place. Some of them can take a really long time to be put in place. I'm thinking of the travel bubble that would involve New Zealand and Australia. They've been talking about it for weeks already, and now they have a date, possible tentative date, which is end of August, beginning of September. It's taking a long time. China has put a number of travel bubbles in place with Singapore, or with South Korea, or even with Germany, when they say, you know what, let's agree on some fast lanes. Let's put some procedures in place so that certain types of travel can be facilitated, business travel in that case. So yes, it's possible to kickstart recovery by developing those travel bubbles, but when you don't have the right structures in place, it's hard work, because it's got to be bilateral, and this takes time. And I'm afraid this is the situation Latin America and the Caribbean are in. It's going to take a lot of negotiation to get this thing, to get recovery rolling.
Yeah, I think it's a very intense point, because when you say, well, in the region there are not supra national entities, they are trying to use WTTC or WTO protocols, but it's not the same, because perhaps some country adopt and other not. Every destination is working hard to assure to the travel that will be safe until he arrives, until he departs. But well, perhaps they are covering different markets. But after this conversation, I think for the regions, seems to me that should be important to try to help the regional companies like Copa, Latam, Avianca, at least these three, because in the new business era for the airline companies, I assume that US companies and European companies will try to do the best effort. Perhaps they need to cut routes, and the first routes, if not, will be some Latin American routes, and we need to try to protect the companies in the region, or try to understand if we can protect it. And of course, the companies do their best effort, because will be the first help to try to catch travelers from US and Europe and so on. If we don't, Lufthansa, American, whatever, they will try to maintain their routes more that will be more busy, that will be internally, no? That attending Latin American destination. No? What do you think? And the other is about, if you think, two questions, no? And the other is about low-cost company. Do you think that there is a new opportunity for low-cost companies?
Okay, so to start with your first question, which is which has to do with air connectivity and how this is going to develop, and how strategic air connectivity can be. From an airline perspective, what will matter most in the coming months is profitability. Okay, is a route profitable or not? Routes where companies can make money will be operated. Routes where they lose money will not be operated. What does this mean for destinations? That some destinations will recover much quicker than others, and that the losers will be in a very tough spot, because they will lose connection with their key source markets. No way they will recover. So what will they do with the capacity that they have, you know, with all these hotels that are empty? It's going to be very difficult. And that's why some governments decide that for strategic reasons, they think that even if a route is not profitable, they need to have someone operating the route. And that's the reasoning behind some of the bailouts, because otherwise, really, some of those bailouts really don't make sense. Some companies have been in serious financial troubles for years. I think Alitalia, for example, or South African Airways, that kind of companies, and yet, you know, they are either receiving government bailout or are probably going to get some kind of government help. Why is that? Because the government considers that this is of strategic value, but it doesn't make much sense from a purely business perspective. So this is the kind of discussion that needs to take place in ruling that needs to take place in Latin America and the Caribbean as well. If a route is not profitable, what is there a good reason to maintain it? And if there is one, then the money needs to come from somewhere to get this route up and running. Now, going back to your second point, which was low-cost airlines, I think I've already touched upon it in a way when saying that it was a good moment to start a new business. And if you want to start a new business at the moment, I think it's going to be on the low cost, either the low cost segment or the high end segment with private jets and that kind of businesses. Worldwide, there are very different situations when it comes to low-cost airlines. Some of those low-cost airlines are in a very strong financial situation. I'm thinking of Wizz Air, for example, that said, well, you know what, this is a great opportunity for us to expand. There's plenty of slots available, and we're going to invest and bet on a speedy recovery so that we're going to significantly increase our market shares. And some others were already in the red when it comes to their financial means, and they're not in a position to expand, they're even shrinking. So there's going to be, again, significant changes in the months to come on the airline market and on the low-cost markets as well.
Well, we are arriving in the last minutes, but I have one question from the audience here that perhaps in your explanation is the answer, but they are asking about airline fares. Now that they will say they will rise or go down, no? But
well, at this stage, it's anyone's bet, honestly. Many people think that at ForwardKeys we've got a crystal ball because we're looking at the future, but we're looking at the future based on current data. And what current data shows is that fares are really low at the moment. But of course, we're in an exceptional situation. That's not the new normal. So I have an opinion on this, but it's as good as yours, Arturo, or people in the audience, because I think in the end it's supply and demand that will define where those prices would be. On the one hand, we know that supply is much lower than when it was in the past, and it's going to remain much lower previous levels for a while, for all the reasons I've mentioned earlier: people laying stuff off, selling aircraft, etc., etc. But we also know that demand is going to be much lower than what it was because there is less disposable income. There's a big economic crisis underway. So it's not like there will be huge demand and very few aircraft flying. I believe in the end everything will depend on the level of the demand and how quickly we get out of the economic crisis we're in. My personal opinion on this is that we will not see a huge increase in fares because load factors are extremely low in aircraft at the moment, and you can't build a business with aircrafts that are half empty. Airlines are not making business with this. So they will try to get as many people on those planes as possible and generate additional revenue by selling auxiliary services or trying to find out different business model to get more out of the people flying with them, but they will make sure that those planes are as full as possible, because otherwise they will not make it from a financial perspective. So I think there's a fair chance that that fares will not rise as much as many people think. But once more, this is my humble opinion on this, and I'm very curious to see if I'm proved to be right or wrong.
So much interested. We talk a lot about airline companies, that they have the problems that they have, consumers that well, they have the problems that they have, about the confidence to recover, and we know that there are so much planes that that they could be used in the next perhaps couple of years until the recovery, like we said before the crisis arrived. What happened with the constructors, Boeing and Airbus? We talk, because after the recovery, perhaps a couple of years, hopefully sooner, we will need more planes. I don't know if the same kind of planes that we use today, but we will need planes. But do you have information about the situation of these two major constructors of planes? No?
Well, I think it's pretty easy to imagine in which situations those constructors are. If people are selling planes by the hundreds or the thousands, it's not to buy new ones in the very, very short term. But what we're also seeing is a quick change in terms of type of fleet that airlines are operating. This crisis is giving them the opportunity to speed up the upgrading of their fleet, in the sense that they're getting rid of those old aircraft that are maybe not very efficient in terms of oil consumption, and making sure that the planes that are flying are planes that are cheap to fly, let's say, and that's an interesting development as well, because that means that all of a sudden the airline business is getting much greener than it's ever been. So in the long run, that's an opportunity, because it means that the new planes that will be sold in the futures will be planes of new generation planes that are much more cost efficient and much more respectful of the environment.
Yeah, it's true, and there are news that, for example, Airbus is working hard and fast with the new Airbus 321, and a small plane, but will in terms of oil, they will request 50% less, no? And they are working so hard on that, no?
It's this crisis is an accelerator for many things. So we tend to see the bad at the moment, because we're all being hurt by this crisis. But there will come some good things will come out of it as well. And it's time to innovate. It's time to experiment, and I think everyone within this sector, whether it's the aircraft constructors, the hoteliers, destinations, everyone is trying to find ways to do business better, in at least differently than the way they used to do it in the past, and there will be some very positive. There will be a positive legacy of this, or at least I believe so. I hope so.
Well, Olivier, we really appreciate, and it was very, very interesting, all your information and thought that we shared with us. I hope you enjoy it. And I don't know if we missed something that you have some ideas or the last idea to share with us about?
I'd just like to wish good luck to everybody within this industry. This is tough, but we're all getting out of this at some stage, and the sooner the better. So good luck to you all.
Thank you so much, Olivier, and thank you to all the audience that shared with us this episode 13. And we will waiting for you next Wednesday, 24, for the episode 14, the hotel new protocols. Thank you so much. See you next Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.